The kitchen was bathed in the soft golden light of late afternoon when Sarah Mitchell's tiny feet began swinging beneath the oak table, back and forth, never quite touching the hardwood floor below. She was 3 years and 4 months old, though her mother had long stopped counting the months. At that age, time moved differently. Days blurred into weeks. Seasons changed before you noticed. Sarah was humming to herself, a tuneless little melody that only she understood, while pushing a plastic block across the table's surface. The sound would have been adorable to anyone else, but to Jennifer Mitchell, it was a heart-wrenching reminder of innocence that was about to be shattered. Jennifer stood at the kitchen counter, her coffee long gone cold, staring at the documents spread before her like a horrifying map of her family's destruction. The papers were from her attorney, crisp and official, each page bearing words that felt like daggers. Allegations, investigation, custody, behavioral concerns. The legal language was supposed to be clinical and objective, but to Jennifer it felt like an indictment of her entire life. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up one page, then another, reading passages she'd already memorized word for word. The separation from Marcus had been finalized 6 months ago. It hadn't been a sudden explosion, but rather a slow, painful erosion of their marriage. The late nights at work that grew later, the emotional distance that became a canyon, the way he looked at her, or rather the way he had stopped looking at her. They tried counseling for a while, but Marcus was resistant, always defensive, always convinced that Jennifer was the one with problems. She was too controlling, he'd said, too neurotic, too focused on Sarah. By the time Jennifer finally asked him to leave, she'd already begun feeling like a failure, a woman who couldn't hold her marriage together. But that had been the easy part. The hard part was what came after. It started 3 weeks ago with a phone call from Sarah's preschool teacher, Miss Amanda Rodriguez. Jennifer had been at work, a job she hated at an insurance company that paid her just barely enough to cover rent and utilities, when her phone buzzed with an urgent message asking her to call back immediately. Her heart had seized with panic. Was Sarah hurt? Was there an accident? No accident. Something worse in some ways. Miss Rodriguez had spoken to Jennifer in hushed tones, her voice carefully neutral but her concern radiating through the phone line. Sarah had said something to another child during circle time, something about how Daddy had touched her in a way that made her uncomfortable. Probably nothing, Miss Rodriguez had assured her, that false cheerfulness that adults use when discussing serious things. Kids say the strangest things, but we have to report everything. Jennifer's world had tilted on its axis. That evening, after she'd picked up Sarah and brought her home, Jennifer had tried to ask her daughter about what happened at school. But how do you ask a 3-year-old about something like that? How do you ask without planting ideas, without terrifying them? How do you separate truth from imagination when your daughter's mind is still learning the difference between what's real and what she's seen in cartoons? Sarah had given vague answers, confused answers. She'd said Daddy had touched her down there, but then couldn't articulate what she meant or when it happened or what exactly she'd felt. A 3-year-old's understanding of her own body was limited. She sometimes called her knees her elbows. How could her testimony mean anything? But the school was required to report it. Within 24 hours, a social worker had called. Jennifer had sat in her car during her lunch break, parked behind the office building, crying silently while explaining her daughter's vague comments to a stranger on the phone. The social worker's name was Ms. Chen, Linda Chen, and she had been surprisingly kind. She'd explained that an investigation would be opened, that there would be interviews, that it was routine in cases like this. Cases like this, Jennifer had thought bitterly, as if there was a handbook for this kind of nightmare. Now, a week into the investigation, Jennifer stood in her kitchen looking at legal documents while her daughter hummed and played blocks, unaware that her future was being dissected by lawyers and judges and social workers. The biggest document on the counter was a notice of custody investigation. Marcus's name was there, and below it, allegations of inappropriate contact with a minor. Even written in formal language, it was terrifying. Her ex-husband, a man she'd loved, a man she'd built a life with, was now officially under investigation for child abuse. If the allegations were true and Jennifer had nightmares about what true meant, then Sarah had been hurt. If they were false, and the doubt gnawed at her constantly, then Jennifer was destroying her ex-husband's life based on the confused words of a toddler. Jennifer pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to stop the spinning sensation in her head. "Mommy, are you okay?" Sarah's voice cut through the darkness behind her eyelids. Jennifer lowered her hands and forced a smile. Her daughter was looking at her with concern, those serious dark eyes that were so much like Marcus's, that had loved Marcus's. "Mommy's just tired, baby," Jennifer said, which was both truth and gross understatement. She was more than tired. She was exhausted on a molecular level, worn down by guilt and doubt and fear. She scooped Sarah up and carried her to the couch, sinking into the worn cushions. Sarah immediately curled against her chest, her small body fitting perfectly in the space between Jennifer's arms and heart. This was the truth Jennifer knew for certain. She loved this child with a fierceness that sometimes frightened her. Every mother loved their child, but Jennifer's love felt almost primal, a force that would make her move mountains or burn down buildings if necessary to keep Sarah safe. But what if keeping Sarah safe meant accusing her father of something he didn't do? What if the investigation destroyed a man who was innocent of wrongdoing? Jennifer had read stories online, terrible, painful stories of families torn apart by false allegations. She'd seen the comments from fathers claiming they'd been falsely accused, their lives ruined, their children turned against them. What if that was happening here? But then Jennifer would remember Sarah saying, with such confusion and uncertainty, "Daddy touched me." And she would think, what if it's true? What if her daughter is suffering and Jennifer doesn't fight hard enough to protect her? The guilt would swing the other direction, even heavier. The investigation was supposed to answer these questions. That's what they kept telling her. Ms. Chen would interview Sarah multiple times. Doctors would examine her. Specialists would assess her behavior. The truth would come out, they promised. The system was designed to find the truth. Jennifer held her daughter closer and whispered a prayer to a God she wasn't sure she still believed in. She prayed for the truth, whatever it was. She prayed for Sarah's safety. She prayed for strength to do the right thing, even though she had no idea what the right thing was anymore. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, colors so beautiful they seemed obscene given the darkness gathering in Jennifer's heart. Sarah fell asleep against her mother's chest, her small hand wrapped around Jennifer's finger. In this moment, in the quiet of their small apartment with her daughter's weight warm against her, Jennifer allowed herself to cry. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent tears that traced down her cheeks and fell onto Sarah's soft hair. The kitchen documents waited on the counter, patient and terrible, ready to change everything. The knock on the door came on a Tuesday morning at 9:47 a.m. Jennifer knew the exact time because she'd checked her phone obsessively all morning, waiting. She'd taken time off work, unpaid time off that she couldn't really afford for these sessions. Her supervisor at the insurance company had been understanding, but barely. "How long will you need?" he'd asked, his tone suggesting that any absence longer than a day was an inconvenience. "I don't know," Jennifer had answered honestly. "As long as it takes." Ms. Linda Chen stood in the doorway, holding a small leather briefcase and wearing the same kind smile she'd offered during their phone conversations. She was in her mid-50s, Jennifer guessed, with warm brown eyes and gray streaking through her black hair. She dressed professionally but not coldly, slacks and a cardigan instead of the suit Jennifer might have expected from a Child Protective Services investigator. This choice, Jennifer realized, was deliberate. Ms. Chen wanted to seem approachable, non-threatening. She wanted Sarah to feel comfortable with her. "How are you holding up?" Ms. Chen asked as she stepped inside, removing her shoes at the door without being asked. Such a small gesture, but it put Jennifer slightly at ease. This woman understood boundaries. She understood respect. "I'm managing," Jennifer lied. She wasn't managing. She was barely functioning. She'd called in sick to work 3 times already. She hadn't slept properly in a week. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Sarah's face, heard her confused words, imagined scenarios that made her stomach turn. Sarah emerged from the living room where she'd been watching cartoons. She was shy around Ms. Chen at first, hiding partially behind Jennifer's leg. Ms. Chen crouched down to Sarah's level, moving slowly and deliberately. "Hi, Sarah, I'm Linda. I brought something for you." She pulled a small coloring book and a box of crayons from her briefcase. "Want to color with me while we talk?" Sarah nodded, still cautious, but took the offered crayons. They settled at the kitchen table, the same table where Jennifer had agonized over legal documents just days before. Ms. Chen placed a small digital recorder on the table, a detail that made Jennifer's chest tighten. Everything Sarah said would be recorded. Everything could be used as evidence. The interview lasted 40 minutes. Ms. Chen asked Sarah simple questions in a gentle, almost casual tone. "Does Daddy ever visit you? What do you do when he visits? Where do you sleep at Daddy's house? Does Daddy ever give you hugs? Does Daddy ever touch you when you don't want him to?" The questions seemed innocent enough individually, but strung together, they felt loaded with implication. Sarah gave answers that were typical of a 3-year-old. Vague, sometimes contradictory, often off-topic. She talked about coloring at Daddy's house. She mentioned that Daddy had a big couch. When asked directly if Daddy touched her in ways that made her uncomfortable, she said yes, one moment and I don't know the next. Jennifer's heart was in her throat the entire time. Ms. Chen remained perfectly professional, never leading Sarah, never suggesting answers. But when Sarah's responses were unclear, Ms. Chen would ask again in a slightly different way, looking for clarification. This was the job, to try to understand what a 3-year-old was saying when she lacked the vocabulary and cognitive development to clearly articulate trauma. After Ms. Chen left, Sarah immediately asked for a snack and returned to her cartoons. She seemed unaffected by the interview, unburdened by it. To her, it was just another strange interaction with an adult. This lack of visible trauma both relieved and terrified Jennifer. Either her daughter wasn't traumatized because nothing had happened, or she was so young that she didn't understand what had happened to her. The second interview came the following week, then the third. Ms. Chen visited their home every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for 3 weeks straight. Jennifer began to dread the knocks on the door. Not because Ms. Chen was unkind, she was genuinely compassionate, but because each interview felt like a weight being added to Jennifer's shoulders. The responses Sarah gave varied. Sometimes she was clear about certain details. Other times she seemed to have no memory of what she'd said before. Once, Sarah told Ms. Chen that Daddy had taken her to the place with the big animals, and Jennifer's blood had gone cold. But then Sarah clarified she meant the zoo, which Jennifer had taken her to with Daddy last summer. It was a zoo trip, not evidence of abuse. By the 3rd week of the investigation, Jennifer was a wreck. She'd made the mistake of Googling false child abuse allegations and had fallen down a rabbit hole of devastating stories. Men whose lives had been destroyed by accusations later proven false. Children who had been influenced by parents, teachers, or therapists to remember events that never happened. The phenomenon of false memory syndrome. The damage caused to families by hasty investigations. One evening, while Sarah slept, Jennifer sat at her laptop and read a forum post from a man named David who claimed his ex-wife had turned their daughter against him with false allegations. "My daughter is fine," he'd written. "She was never hurt, but my life is over. I can't get a job. I can't see my child. Everyone assumes I'm guilty even though I was never even charged." The post had over 800 responses, many from other men with similar stories. Jennifer had slammed the laptop shut, her hands shaking. But then she'd opened it again and read the counter-arguments, the stories from women whose children actually had been abused and whose abusers had escaped justice because people didn't believe them. The confusion was maddening. Marcus's lawyer, A sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Rothstein had sent increasingly hostile letters. Your client, one read, addressed to Jennifer's own attorney, appears to be using this investigation as a weapon in what should be a simple custody dispute. My client strenuously denies all allegations and questions the reliability of testimony from a 3-year-old. We are prepared to prove that these allegations are a product of parental coaching and false memory implantation. The word coaching had struck Jennifer like a physical blow. Was that what she'd done? Had she somehow, unconsciously, led Sarah toward certain answers? She'd been careful not to suggest things. She tried to let Sarah speak for herself. But what if her fear, her worry, her suspicion? What if Sarah had sensed all of that and adjusted her responses to match what she thought Jennifer wanted to hear? The media attention made everything worse. Jennifer had no idea how, but local reporters had gotten wind of the story. A news van had shown up outside her apartment building. A journalist with perfectly coiffed hair had ambushed her as she was leaving for the grocery store, thrusting a microphone in her face and asking, "Ms. Mitchell, can you comment on the allegations against your ex-husband?" Jennifer had no comment. She'd said nothing, just hurried Sarah past the cameras, trying to shield her daughter's face. But the story had spread. "Local man under investigation for child abuse," the headline screamed. The comment sections beneath online articles were brutal. Some people sided with Jennifer, believed the child. Others attacked her. "This looks like a custody grab. I bet she coached her daughter." Her phone rang constantly. A reporter from a podcast series about family court wanted to interview her. A lawyer specializing in abuse cases wanted to help. Even distant relatives were calling, some supportive, others suggesting she was being hasty. Jennifer turned off her phone most days. What terrified her most was the uncertainty. Ms. Chen had explained that the investigation could take several months. There would be medical exams, interviews with teachers, psychological evaluations. "We're trying to build a complete picture," Ms. Chen had said kindly, which somehow made it worse. Because how do you build a complete picture when the central figure in that picture is a confused 3-year-old who can't reliably distinguish between memory and imagination? One night, about 4 weeks into the investigation, Jennifer found herself sitting in her car in a dark parking lot, seriously considering just calling Marcus. Calling him and saying, "Maybe we're wrong. Maybe nothing happened. Let's stop this before it destroys everything." But then she'd remembered Sarah saying, with such confusion and vulnerability, "Daddy touched me." And she'd remembered that as her mother, her job was to protect her child, even if it meant destroying herself in the process. She'd started the car and driven home, to her daughter sleeping in the next room, and had whispered another prayer to a God she still wasn't sure existed. The investigation pressed on, and Jennifer's doubt, like a living thing, grew larger each day. The letter arrived on a Friday afternoon, official and cream-colored, with the seal of the family court system embossed at the top. Jennifer recognized the letterhead immediately and felt her stomach clench. She opened it with trembling fingers while Sarah napped, reading the formal language that announced the next phase of this nightmare. The court date was set for 6 weeks away. More importantly, there would be a pre-trial meeting with Dr. Margaret Sullivan, a child psychologist specializing in court testimony for young children. The letter explained that Dr. Sullivan would meet with Sarah to prepare her for the courtroom experience and to assess her emotional readiness to testify. It also mentioned something that made Jennifer's heart skip. "We have arranged for the services of a certified court comfort dog to be present during Ms. Mitchell's testimony. This animal has been specially trained to provide emotional support to child witnesses." Jennifer read those sentences 3 times before the full impact hit her. A dog. They were bringing a dog into the courtroom while her terrified 3-year-old daughter testified about possible abuse. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so she did neither. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table and stared at the letter until Sarah woke up asking for juice. The first appointment with Dr. Sullivan was 2 weeks later, in an office that looked more like a playroom than a therapist's space. Soft rugs covered the floor. Toys were arranged on shelves. One wall had a mural of a sunny meadow painted across it. Despite the cheerful surroundings, Jennifer could feel the clinical eye of the professional watching and assessing. Dr. Sullivan was younger than Jennifer expected, maybe early 40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and an easy manner that immediately put Sarah at ease. She wore casual clothes instead of professional attire, and she sat on the floor with Sarah rather than maintaining the distance of a desk. "I want to help Sarah understand what's going to happen in the big courthouse," Dr. Sullivan explained to Jennifer while Sarah played with blocks. "The courtroom can be scary for children. It's loud, it's formal, there are lots of strangers. I'll be preparing her for that experience and helping her develop coping strategies." Jennifer nodded, grateful for someone who seemed to actually understand what her daughter was about to go through. The sessions with Dr. Sullivan happened twice a week for 4 weeks. Sarah would draw pictures of what she imagined the courthouse looked like. Dr. Sullivan used puppets and dolls to act out testimony scenarios in a gentle, non-traumatic way. She taught Sarah simple breathing exercises, in through your nose, out through your mouth, to help her stay calm. She explained in age-appropriate language that there would be a judge, a nice person who helps make decisions. There would be other adults who would ask her questions. "It's okay to say, 'I don't know,'" Dr. Sullivan emphasized repeatedly. "It's okay to say you don't remember. You don't have to know all the answers." But as these sessions progressed, Jennifer noticed Sarah becoming more anxious, not less. The child had started having trouble sleeping. She would cling to Jennifer more desperately at drop-off. Once, Jennifer found her sitting alone in her room, silently crying. "What's wrong, baby?" Jennifer had asked, scooping her up. "I don't want to go to court," Sarah had whispered. "I'm scared." Jennifer's heart had broken into 1,000 pieces. "I know, sweetie, I know you're scared, but you're so brave and I'll be right there with you." But would that be enough? Would her presence actually protect Sarah from the trauma of testifying in front of strangers about something she didn't even fully understand? Then came the news about the dog. Jennifer received a call from the court clerk, who explained that a certified court dog, specifically a golden Labrador named Bailey, would be present during Sarah's testimony. "This is entirely voluntary," the clerk had assured her. "If you or Sarah feel uncomfortable with the dog, we can proceed without it." Jennifer had immediately thought of the incident from 8 months ago. The neighbor's German Shepherd had gotten loose while Sarah was playing in the hallway of their apartment building. The dog had chased her, barking loudly, and Sarah had screamed in terror. Jennifer had scooped her up just as the dog's owner caught up with it, pulling the animal away. Sarah had been inconsolable for hours afterward. For weeks, she'd refused to go near anyone's dog. The trauma, while not severe, had left an impression. That evening, Jennifer sat Sarah down and tried to explain about Bailey. "There's going to be a special dog at the courthouse," Jennifer began carefully. "A very nice dog. Her name is Bailey, and she's there to help kids feel less scared." Sarah's eyes had gone wide. "A big dog?" "She's a golden Labrador," Jennifer had said, pulling up pictures on her phone. "She's very gentle and very kind. She helps children all the time." Sarah had looked at the pictures with a mixture of curiosity and dread. "Will she chase me?" The question had broken Jennifer's heart all over again. "No, baby. Bailey would never chase you. She's trained to be calm and gentle. She sits quietly and lets children pet her." "I don't like big dogs," Sarah had said firmly, her 3-year-old stubbornness on full display. Jennifer hadn't pushed. She'd simply shown Sarah the pictures multiple times over the next week, leaving them on the coffee table. She'd played videos of dogs being calm and kind. She'd ordered a children's book about a therapeutic dog and read it to Sarah every night before bed, using it as an opportunity to normalize the idea of being near a dog in a safe context. One evening during their bedtime routine, Sarah had asked, "Will Bailey be nice to me?" "Yes, sweetheart," Jennifer had promised. "Bailey will be very nice to you. She's there to be your friend while you talk to the judge." "What if I'm too scared?" Sarah had asked. "Then Bailey will help you feel less scared," Jennifer had said, and she'd held her daughter close, willing the child to believe something Jennifer herself didn't entirely believe. The week before the hearing, Sarah's anxiety reached a fever pitch. She had developed a visible tic, blinking rapidly and repeatedly. She was having accidents at preschool, something she hadn't done in months. She clung to Jennifer with a desperation that was heartbreaking. At night, she would wake up crying from nightmares. Jennifer would find her sitting up in bed, disoriented and terrified, and would hold her until the fear subsided. One night, 3 days before the scheduled testimony, Sarah had screamed in her sleep. Jennifer had rushed to her room to find her daughter thrashing in her bed, tangled in the blankets like they were restraints. "I don't want to go," Sarah had sobbed when she woke. "I'm scared of the big dog, I'm scared of the judge, I don't want to tell about Daddy." Jennifer had sat on the edge of the bed and simply held her daughter while she cried, and Jennifer had cried too. This was what they'd done to their child. This investigation, this system designed to protect children, had terrified Sarah beyond measure. "I'm sorry," Jennifer had whispered into Sarah's hair. "I'm so sorry, baby. I know you're scared, but you're so brave. You're the bravest girl I know." But even as she said it, Jennifer wondered if she was being brave or just cruel. Was she protecting her daughter or sacrificing her on the altar of the justice system? The night before the hearing, Jennifer didn't sleep at all. She sat in the dark living room, watching her daughter sleep on the couch beside her. Sarah looked impossibly small, impossibly vulnerable. Her thumb was in her mouth, a habit she'd broken months ago but had returned to since the investigation began. Her face was blotchy from crying. Jennifer whispered prayers and promises. "Please let her be okay. Please let the truth come out. Please protect my baby. Please let this end. Please let everything be okay." But she didn't know which ending she was praying for anymore. Outside, the night was dark and endless. Inside, a mother sat vigil over her sleeping daughter, both of them waiting for a sunrise that would change everything. In the morning, they would walk into that courthouse. Sarah would sit in that witness box. She would see Bailey the dog. She would try to answer questions about her body, her father, her fear, things a 3-year-old should never have to articulate. And Jennifer would sit in the gallery, watching her daughter's innocence be interrogated in the name of justice. She reached over and gently pulled Sarah's thumb from her mouth, smoothing her daughter's hair back from her forehead. Tomorrow would come whether they were ready or not. The alarm on Jennifer's phone went off at 6:00 a.m., though she'd been awake since 4:47. She'd watched the darkness gradually lighten into gray dawn, had felt her anxiety grow with each passing minute. Now, as the alarm's sharp beeping cut through the silent apartment, she silenced it immediately, not wanting to wake Sarah before she had to. But Sarah was already awake. Jennifer found her daughter sitting up in bed, thumb in mouth, eyes wide and glassy. She'd been awake for who knew how long, lying in the darkness, waiting for a day she'd been dreading for weeks. "Hi, baby," Jennifer said softly, sitting on the edge of the mattress. "How are you feeling?" Sarah didn't answer. She simply reached out and wrapped her arms around Jennifer's neck, holding on with a desperation that conveyed everything: the fear, the confusion, the sense that something monumental and terrifying was about to happen. They stayed like that for 5 minutes, maybe longer. Time felt strange this morning, like it was moving at a different speed than normal. The pink dress hung on the closet door, carefully pressed the night before. Jennifer had chosen it because it was Sarah's favorite, soft and twirly, making her feel pretty and special. Jennifer had read somewhere that letting children wear something they felt confident in before giving testimony could help their emotional state. But as Sarah stood in the bathroom, Jennifer helping her into the dress, the child looked anything but confident. She looked small, fragile, terrified. Jennifer did her daughter's hair carefully, trying to make the effort feel normal and routine. She braided Sarah's dark curls into 2 neat plaits, tying them with pink ribbons that matched the dress. In the mirror, Sarah looked like the beautiful 3-year-old she was. She also looked devastatingly vulnerable. "You look so pretty, sweetheart," Jennifer said, even though all she felt was horror at what was about to happen to this child. "I don't feel pretty," Sarah whispered. "I feel sick." Jennifer's chest tightened. "I know, baby. Your tummy is nervous. That's normal. Lots of people feel that way before they have to do something scary. But you're going to get through it, and I'm going to be right there with you." Sarah nodded, but tears were already sliding down her cheeks, creating tracks through the careful makeup Jennifer had applied. Not that it mattered. The makeup would come off in the car. The drive to the courthouse took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. Jennifer had taken a different route than the most direct one, trying to avoid as much traffic as possible. She wanted everything to be calm, everything to feel controlled. But even on the quieter streets, her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Sarah sat in her car seat in the back, wearing her seatbelt and her pink dress, looking out the window with the expression of someone being led to their execution. Every few minutes she would ask, "Are we there yet?" even though they'd only been driving for 5 minutes. "Not yet, sweetie," Jennifer would answer each time. "Soon." When they were about 3 blocks away from the courthouse, Jennifer's phone buzzed with a text from her attorney, Michael Chen, no relation to Ms. Linda Chen from CPS. "Media presence is significant," the text read. "Expect cameras. I'll meet you at the north entrance." Jennifer's stomach dropped. She'd known there would be press. The story had taken on a life of its own since it first broke. Local man under investigation for child abuse. Custody battle turns ugly. 3-year-old to testify against father. The headlines had multiplied. People online had taken sides, debating fiercely whether Jennifer was a protective mother or a vindictive ex-wife. Marcus had given an interview expressing his shock and denying all allegations. Now, apparently, his supporters had shown up. Jennifer took the turn onto the street leading to the courthouse, and immediately she saw them. News vans lined the parking lot, 3 of them, each with satellite dishes on the roof. Camera crews were setting up, photographers and reporters clustered near the courthouse entrance like vultures. Jennifer felt her breathing become shallow. There was no way to avoid them. She pulled into a parking spot as far from the entrance as possible and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. "Stay right next to me," Jennifer instructed Sarah, unbuckling her daughter from the car seat. "Hold my hand really tight. Don't let go, okay?" Sarah nodded, understanding even without full comprehension that something serious was happening. They stepped out of the car, and immediately the reporters noticed them. It was like someone had turned on a switch. The cluster of media personnel exploded into motion. Cameras turned toward them. Reporters started jogging across the parking lot, arms full of equipment, mouths already forming questions. Ms. Mitchell, can you comment on the allegations? Is your daughter prepared for testimony today? Do you believe your ex-husband committed these crimes?" The questions overlapped, becoming a cacophony of intrusive noise. Jennifer wrapped her arm around Sarah protectively, shielding her daughter's face with her body as much as possible. She didn't answer. She just walked, fast but not running, pulling Sarah along. A reporter with professionally highlighted blonde hair thrust a microphone toward them. "Your daughter is only 3 years old. Don't you think she's too young to give reliable testimony?" Jennifer didn't respond. She couldn't. If she opened her mouth, she was afraid she would scream. Michael Chen appeared at the north entrance exactly as promised and hurried down the steps toward them. He held his briefcase up like a shield, blocking the camera's line of sight. "No comment," he said firmly to the reporters. "My client has nothing to say." He ushered Jennifer and Sarah quickly inside the building, and the heavy wooden doors closed behind them, cutting off the noise and chaos of the media circus. Inside the courthouse, everything was different. The hallways were long and imposing, with high ceilings and polished marble floors that echoed with every footstep. The walls were an institutional beige, lined with doors that all looked identical. There was a smell, something like furniture polish and old paper, and the metallic tang of institutional air conditioning. Sarah's eyes went impossibly wide as she looked up at the soaring ceiling. "It's so big," she whispered. "I know, baby," Jennifer said, squeezing her daughter's hand. "But it's okay, we're safe in here." They went through security. Jennifer had to remove her shoes and belt, had to put her purse through an X-ray machine. Sarah, mercifully, was waved through without additional screening. The security guards, at least, had some compassion for a 3-year-old. Michael led them to a small consultation room on the second floor. "We'll wait here," he said. "The judge will probably want to see you both before we go into the courtroom. Let's review what's going to happen." But even as Michael explained the procedure, Jennifer's mind was somewhere else. She was acutely aware of Sarah sitting beside her, small and terrified in her pink dress, about to enter a space that was designed for adults and their conflicts, not for children and innocents. At 9:45 a.m., a bailiff came to get them. "The judge is ready," she said, not unkindly. She was an older woman with gentle eyes, and she crouched down to Sarah's level. "Hi there, sweetie, I'm Miss Paula. I'm going to help you go into the courtroom now. Are you ready?" Sarah looked up at Jennifer, silently asking for permission or rescue or something. "You're so brave," Jennifer whispered, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "Remember, I'm right there in the courtroom. I can see you the whole time." They followed Miss Paula down the hallway and toward the double doors of the courtroom. Through the small window, Jennifer could see inside, the judge's bench elevated high, the witness stand, the tables where attorneys would sit. It looked like a stage set for a play, except it was real, and her daughter was about to be the central character. The doors opened. The courtroom was larger than Sarah expected and quieter. There were maybe a dozen people inside, the judge, attorneys, court staff, and a few spectators. All eyes turned as Sarah and Jennifer entered. Sarah froze, her hand gripping Jennifer's with such intensity it hurt. Judge Patricia Hanson sat at the elevated bench, regarding Sarah with an expression that was professional but not unkind. She was a woman in her 60s, with steel-gray hair and intelligent eyes. Her black robe seemed to give her an otherworldly authority. "Welcome, Ms. Mitchell and Sarah," the judge said, her voice carrying through the quiet courtroom. "We're going to take very good care of Sarah today." Sarah didn't respond. She was looking around the room with the expression of a person who had entered another dimension. And then the door to the right opened, and a handler entered, leading Bailey. A woman in her 50s, wearing a handler's vest and carrying herself with quiet authority, entered the courtroom. She walked with deliberate slowness, moving with the kind of careful control that suggested she was managing something precious and delicate. On a leather leash beside her was Bailey, a golden Labrador whose coat gleamed under the courtroom lights like spun honey. Sarah's entire body went rigid. Every muscle in the child's small frame tensed. Her breathing became shallow. Jennifer, sitting in the gallery behind the wooden rail that separated spectators from participants, felt her own heart seize with dread. This was it. This was where Sarah would break. This was where the fear would overwhelm her completely. The handler positioned Bailey beside the witness stand, securing the leash to a designated hook. The dog didn't struggle or pull. She simply settled onto the carpeted floor, her tail still, her brown eyes watching the courtroom with the calm wisdom that only came from months of specialized training. Sarah was staring directly at Bailey. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Judge Hanson watched from her bench. The attorneys, both Jennifer's advocate and Marcus's sharp-eyed lawyer, leaned forward slightly. The court stenographer's fingers hovered over her keyboard, ready to document whatever came next. And Sarah stared. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. Jennifer could see her daughter's chest rising and falling rapidly with shallow breaths. Could see the way Sarah's hands gripped the edge of the witness stand. Could see the fear in every line of her tiny body. Then something shifted. Sarah tilted her head, an entirely natural, curious gesture. She was studying the dog the way a scientist might study a remarkable phenomenon. Her breathing, while still rapid, began to slow slightly. And Bailey, as if sensing something profound in that small girl's examination, shifted her massive head. The dog moved slowly, deliberately, and rested her chin on a cushion placed right next to the witness stand. Bailey's brown eyes, soft and intelligent, looked directly into Sarah's dark eyes. It was only a moment, but it was transformative. Sarah's rigid posture softened fractionally. Her hand released its death grip on the witness stand and slowly, tentatively, extended toward the dog. Jennifer held her breath as Sarah's small fingers made contact with Bailey's silken ear. The touching was gentle, almost reverent. Sarah's whole face changed. The fear didn't disappear, but it was joined by something else, wonder perhaps, or the simple realization that this creature, which she'd been terrified of, was real and solid and gentle. A barely perceptible smile crossed Sarah's face. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. The prosecutor, a woman named Susan Martinez who'd been exceptionally careful and kind in her pretrial meetings with Sarah, began her questioning. She spoke slowly, using simple words, avoiding any complex language that might confuse a 3-year-old. "Sarah, can you tell me your full name?" she began. "Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "How old are you, Sarah?" "I'm 3, Sarah said, holding up 3 fingers. "Do you know what it means to tell the truth?" Sarah nodded. "Can you tell me what it means?" "It means you say the real things, not the pretend things." Ms. Martinez smiled gently. "That's right. Very good, Sarah. Are you going to tell the truth today?" "Yes," Sarah said. And with Bailey's head resting peacefully beside her, Sarah began to answer questions about her body, her father, and things a 3-year-old should never have to articulate. The prosecutor's questions were carefully crafted to be as non-leading as possible, yet clear enough for a small child to understand. "Has anyone ever touched you in a way that made you feel uncomfortable? Where did that happen? How did it make you feel?" The questions were gentle, but they required Sarah to access memories and emotions that were confusing and difficult. Sarah's answers were vague as they'd always been. "Daddy, he, down there." She couldn't articulate exactly where or when or what she felt. She gave answers that could mean everything or nothing. Jennifer felt her own uncertainty spiral again. Was her daughter describing trauma? Or was she describing innocent bathroom help, diaper changes, or something equally benign that she'd misunderstood or misremembered? The prosecutor finished her questioning after about 15 minutes. Sarah had grown quiet but hadn't become hysterical. Bailey remained calm beside her, a steady anchor. Then Marcus's attorney, Patricia Rothstein, stood up. The cross-examination was where everything changed. Ms. Rothstein didn't smile. She didn't use a gentle tone. Her questions came rapid-fire, designed to confuse, to contradict Sarah's previous statements, to make it clear, to anyone watching, that a 3-year-old couldn't be a reliable witness. "Sarah, didn't you tell Ms. Chen that Daddy took you to the zoo?" "Yes," Sarah whispered. "But you also said that Daddy touched you down there, at the zoo, correct?" I don't remember." "You don't remember, or it didn't happen." Sarah's face crumpled. Tears began to slide down her cheeks. "Sarah, when your mommy asked you about Daddy, did she tell you what to say?" "No," Sarah said, but her voice was uncertain. "Are you sure? Because sometimes mommies ask their children to say things about daddies to make them go away, don't they?" "I don't know," Sarah said, and now she was crying, her small shoulders shaking. Bailey immediately sensed the shift in Sarah's emotional state. The dog lifted her head and pressed it closer to Sarah's leg. Sarah reached down and grabbed Bailey's fur, holding on as if the dog was the only solid thing in a world that was falling apart. The cross-examination continued for another 15 minutes. Ms. Rothstein asked the same questions in different ways, seemingly trying to get contradictory answers. She suggested that Sarah was confused. She implied that Jennifer had coached her. She painted a picture of a confused, unreliable child who couldn't possibly give trustworthy testimony. With each question, Sarah shrank further into herself, but Bailey never moved. The dog's presence was constant, steady, unchanging. Whenever Sarah's fear spiked, Bailey would shift closer. When Sarah grabbed her fur too tightly, Bailey didn't pull away. The dog seemed to understand that she was the only thing keeping this small child grounded. Jennifer watched her daughter being interrogated and felt a rage building in her chest so intense it was almost physical. This was happening. This was actually happening. They were tearing into a 3-year-old, trying to make her look unreliable, trying to protect a man who may or may not have hurt her. The entire system was designed around adult concerns, burden of proof, reasonable doubt, legal procedures. And caught in the middle was a terrified child. When the questioning finally ended, Sarah was exhausted. She looked smaller than when the testimony had begun, as if the ordeal had physically diminished her. Her pink dress was wrinkled. Her carefully braided hair had come partially loose. Her face was blotchy from crying. Judge Hanson called for a 15-minute recess. Sarah immediately reached for Jennifer, who scooped her daughter up and held her against her chest. Sarah's small arms wrapped around Jennifer's neck, and she began to cry again. Deep, shaking sobs that came from somewhere primal, somewhere that understood on an instinctive level that she had just endured something deeply wrong. Bailey's handler led the dog out of the courtroom, and Sarah's eyes tracked the dog's departure with an intensity that broke Jennifer's heart. Bailey had been her connection to safety in a space designed to be unsafe. Bailey had been her anchor in a storm. Michael Chen approached Jennifer in the hallway. "She did well," he said, but even he looked shaken by what they'd all witnessed. "Did she?" Jennifer asked bitterly. "Or did we just watch a lawyer tear apart a 3-year-old to protect a man who may have hurt her?" "The judge saw it," Michael said quietly. Judge Hanson was watching Sarah very carefully. "She saw how genuinely scared your daughter was. That matters." But Jennifer wasn't sure that it did. In a legal system designed around evidence and testimony, did a 3-year-old's fear count as evidence? Or was it just another confusing element in a case that was already impossibly muddled? Sarah fell asleep in Jennifer's arms before the recess was even over, her exhaustion so profound that she slipped into unconsciousness, despite the hard courtroom bench beneath them. Jennifer held her sleeping daughter and waited for whatever came next. Sarah woke as Jennifer carried her back into the courtroom, disoriented and groggy. The child still clung to her mother as they took their seats in the gallery. Judge Hanson had instructed that the hearing would continue, but first there would be a few minutes for everyone to reset. The attorneys returned to their tables, arranging papers, consulting with their clients. The judge disappeared into chambers. The bailiff stood silently by the door. Sarah looked toward the empty space where Bailey had been. "Where's the doggy?" she asked, her voice small and worried. "Bailey will come back soon," Jennifer whispered, though she wasn't sure that was true. She didn't know the courtroom's procedures. She didn't know anything anymore except that her daughter had been broken down by questioning, and now they were about to continue the process that had broken her. Judge Hanson re-entered the courtroom at 2:23 p.m. Everyone stood as she took her seat at the elevated bench. She regarded the room with an expression that was difficult to read. Then she looked directly at Sarah. "We're going to have just a few more minutes with you, Sarah," the judge said, her voice gentler than it had been before. "I have some questions for you. Is that okay?" Sarah didn't respond. She'd gone almost catatonic with exhaustion and fear. The bailiff made a subtle gesture, and Bailey's handler brought the dog back into the courtroom. Bailey was positioned in her same spot, and the moment the dog settled, Sarah's body relaxed fractionally. She reached out one trembling hand and touched Bailey's head. Judge Hanson waited, watching this interaction with an intensity that suggested she understood its significance. "Sarah," Judge Hanson began, "I want to ask you a question, and I want you to answer it with your true words. Okay?" "Okay," Sarah whispered. "When someone does something that makes you feel scared or uncomfortable, what do you do?" The courtroom was completely silent. Jennifer held her breath. She realized she'd been holding her breath for the entire cross-examination and most of the recess. Her chest felt tight, her vision slightly tunnel-like from oxygen deprivation. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. She was 3 years old. She wasn't trained in legal procedures. She didn't understand the weight of her words. She was simply a small child who'd been through an ordeal, trying to answer a question from an authority figure who scared her but was being kinder than the previous questioner. Sarah looked down at Bailey. Her small fingers traced along the dog's soft fur. She seemed to be drawing strength from the dog's presence, or perhaps Bailey was drawing the truth out of her. Then Sarah looked up at the judge. "I tell Bailey," Sarah said, her voice barely audible but somehow crystalline clear in the silent courtroom. "I tell Mommy, I don't want to be scared." The courtroom was frozen. Those were the only words, just that simple sentence constructed with a 3-year-old's limited grammar and vocabulary. "I tell Bailey, I tell Mommy, I don't want to be scared." But in those words was something that transcended legal testimony and technical language, and all the procedural complexity of the court system. In those words was absolute truth. Jennifer's hand flew to her mouth. She felt tears streaming down her face before she even understood what was happening. Those words, those simple, heartbreaking words, had distilled everything. Sarah wasn't describing specific acts. She wasn't giving a detailed account that lawyers could pick apart and argue about. She was simply expressing a fundamental human need, the need to feel safe. And the implication of those words was devastating. Because if Sarah felt safe enough to tell her mother and Bailey the dog about her discomfort, then something was making her uncomfortable. Something was causing her to seek safety in telling others. A 3-year-old doesn't spontaneously develop the coping mechanism of reporting discomfort unless something has taught her to be uncomfortable. Beside Jennifer, Michael Chen was perfectly still, but his jaw clenched slightly. He understood the power of what he'd just witnessed. Across the courtroom, Marcus's face had gone pale. Patricia Rothstein, his attorney, was frantically scribbling notes, but even she seemed to understand that something irreversible had just happened. Judge Hanson's expression had changed. Where before there had been judicial neutrality, now there was something that looked like profound sadness mixed with understanding. She leaned back in her chair, and even from her elevated position, it was clear that Sarah's words had affected her deeply. "Thank you, Sarah," the judge said quietly. "You can step down now." But Sarah didn't move immediately. She was still looking at Bailey. She reached down one final time and wrapped her small arms around the dog's neck, hugging the animal with all the desperation and gratitude a 3-year-old could muster. Bailey remained perfectly still, accepting Sarah's embrace, allowing the child to draw whatever comfort and safety she needed from the connection. Bailey's handler waited patiently, understanding that this moment was important. Some bonds transcended professional boundaries. Finally, Sarah released the dog and allowed the bailiff to help her down from the witness stand. The moment her feet touched the floor, Jennifer was there, scooping her up and holding her against her chest. Sarah buried her face in Jennifer's shoulder and began to cry, not the panicked crying of fear, but something deeper. The release that comes when you've finally spoken something true that you've been carrying alone. Judge Hanson called for a recess. "I need to review the evidence," she said formally. "I'll reconvene in 1 hour." In the hallway outside the courtroom, Jennifer found a small family bathroom and locked herself in with Sarah. She set her daughter on the tile floor and sat beside her, and they held each other in the fluorescent-lit privacy of that small space. Sarah cried until she had no more tears. Jennifer cried for different reasons, for her daughter's suffering, for her own helplessness, for the nightmare that had become their life. "It's over," Jennifer whispered. "The questions are over, you don't have to talk anymore." "Where's Bailey?" Sarah asked, her voice hoarse from crying. "Bailey has to go home," Jennifer said gently. "But Bailey loves you. Bailey helped you be so brave." Sarah nodded, accepting this with the resignation of a child who'd learned that things she loved had to go away sometimes. When they emerged from the bathroom, Michael was waiting in the hallway. He paused, searching for words. "That was powerful, Jennifer. The judge saw something important in Sarah's testimony. Not the details, those were vague and contradictory as expected, but something else. Sarah's emotional state, her need for safety, her instinctive awareness that she needed to tell someone about her discomfort." "Is that enough?" Jennifer asked. "Will that be enough to protect her?" "I don't know," Michael said honestly. "But what I do know is that Judge Hanson was moved by it. And sometimes, in family court, that matters as much as legal precedent." They waited in a small conference room for the hour to pass. Sarah fell asleep on Jennifer's lap, exhausted beyond measure. Jennifer stroked her daughter's hair and thought about those 4 simple sentences. "I tell Bailey, I tell Mommy, I don't want to be scared." They were words spoken by a child who didn't understand the legal system or courtroom procedures. They were words that contained no graphic descriptions, no specific allegations, nothing that could be analyzed and debated by attorneys. And yet, they were perhaps the most damaging testimony that could have been given. Because they revealed the truth in its purest form. A child was scared. A child needed to tell her mother when she was uncomfortable. A child was seeking safety. And no legal argument could negate the power of that simple, devastating honesty. At 3:47 p.m., the bailiff came to notify them that the judge was ready to reconvene. Jennifer woke Sarah, wiped away her dried tears, smoothed her wrinkled dress, and carried her back into the courtroom one final time. The benches were full of observers now. Word had spread about the hearing, and people had come to witness the conclusion. Judge Hanson sat at her bench, her expression grave but contemplative. She began to speak, and Jennifer listened to her daughter's fate being decided. Judge Patricia Hanson sat at her elevated bench, her hands folded in front of her, her expression carrying the weight of a decision that would alter multiple lives. The courtroom was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional shuffle of papers. Observers lined the gallery. Some had come out of genuine interest in child welfare, others because the story had become gossip, entertainment, a puzzle to solve. Sarah sat on Jennifer's lap, still drowsy and confused, not understanding the magnitude of what was about to happen. "I have reviewed all the evidence presented in this case," Judge Hanson began, her voice carrying through the courtroom with quiet authority. "I have considered the testimony, the investigation reports, the psychological evaluations, and the behavioral observations from multiple sources." She paused, adjusting her reading glasses. "This is an extraordinarily difficult case," she continued. "We are dealing with a child who is far too young to provide the kind of clear, detailed testimony that the legal system typically relies upon. We have contradictory statements. We have vague recollections. We have a 3-year-old child attempting to articulate experiences and emotions that she lacks the cognitive and linguistic development to properly convey." Jennifer felt her heart sinking. This sounded like the preamble to a dismissal. This sounded like the judge was about to rule that there wasn't enough evidence. "However," Judge Hanson continued, and Jennifer's breath caught, "the totality of evidence in this case cannot be ignored. While Ms. Sarah Mitchell's verbal testimony was understandably incomplete and sometimes contradictory, Her emotional and behavioral presentation throughout this proceeding has been consistent with a child experiencing significant anxiety, fear, and a demonstrated need for emotional safety. The judge removed her glasses and looked directly at Sarah. "I observed a child who was terrified," Judge Hanson said. "A child whose fear seemed genuine and profound. A child who spontaneously expressed a need to communicate her discomfort to her mother and to a therapy animal. These are not the indicators of a child manufacturing stories. These are indicators of a child who has experienced something that has fundamentally altered her sense of safety in the world." Jennifer's hands trembled as she held Sarah closer. "Furthermore," Judge Hanson continued, "the CPS investigation, while not conclusive, did identify behavioral changes in the child consistent with trauma. The preschool teacher's report increased anxiety. The child's sleep patterns have been disrupted. She has regressed in behavioral milestones. All of this points toward a child who is experiencing distress." Marcus sat rigidly in his chair, his attorney leaning toward him, whispering something urgently. "The defendant's argument that this child has been coached by her mother is possible," Judge Hanson acknowledged. "However, I observed Ms. Jennifer Mitchell throughout this entire proceeding. Her concern for her daughter appeared genuine. Her advocacy was grounded in protection, not revenge. While no parent is unbiased, I did not observe evidence of deliberate coaching or manipulation." Patricia Rothstein's face had gone hard. She was calculating how to appeal whatever ruling was coming. "Therefore," Judge Hanson said, "in the matter of custody and visitation between Marcus James Mitchell and Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, this court rules as follows." The entire courtroom seemed to lean forward. "Sarah's primary residence will remain with her mother, Jennifer Mitchell. This order prioritizes the child's stated need for safety and her mother's demonstrated commitment to her well-being. Marcus Mitchell will be entitled to supervised visitation with his daughter, not to exceed 4 hours per visit, on alternate weekends." Jennifer exhaled a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "However," the judge continued, and Jennifer's relief transformed into caution, "this supervised visitation will only begin after Mr. Mitchell has completed a comprehensive psychological evaluation and participated in parenting classes focused on age-appropriate boundary awareness and child development. The supervised visitation will be overseen by a professional supervisor approved by this court." Marcus's attorney was writing furiously, already planning the appeal. "This court does not find beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Mitchell engaged in criminal conduct," Judge Hanson said, and Michael Chen's hand gripped Jennifer's shoulder in warning. This was not a complete victory. "However, this court does find reasonable concern regarding Mr. Mitchell's understanding of appropriate boundaries with a young child. Whether intentional or not, his behavior has resulted in significant distress to his daughter. The safety and psychological well-being of the minor child must be the paramount concern of this court," Judge Hanson continued. "While the legal system often requires clear evidence for criminal conviction, family court exists to protect children's welfare. In this instance, the preponderance of evidence, including behavioral indicators, emotional distress, and the child's spontaneous expression of a need for safety, supports a custody arrangement that prioritizes Ms. Sarah Mitchell's well-being." The judge's eyes moved to Sarah, who was looking at her with confused, exhausted eyes. "This court recognizes that Ms. Sarah Mitchell has been placed in an impossible position by the circumstances of her family's situation," Judge Hanson said. "I want to be clear. The court does not hold this child responsible for this case. She is a 3-year-old child who has been brave in ways that no 3-year-old should have to be brave. Whatever the ultimate truth of this situation, Sarah Mitchell's emotional well-being is what matters now." Judge Hanson looked toward where Bailey had been stationed during testimony. The dog had been removed before the recess, but her impact remained visible in the way Sarah occasionally looked toward the now empty spot. I also want to acknowledge the use of court-facilitated comfort animals in child testimony," the judge continued. Ms. Bailey's presence during this child's testimony provided measurable emotional support. It allowed a young, frightened child to access her voice in a way that might not have been possible otherwise. I intend to recommend to the Administrative Court Committee that we expand our use of comfort animals in child testimony proceedings. Children's voices matter, and we must create spaces where those voices can be heard. The ruling was complete. The gavel came down with a sound that seemed to echo through eternity. Outside the courtroom, chaos erupted. Media cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Photographers tried to catch images of Sarah, though Jennifer shielded her daughter fiercely. The story had the headline it needed: "Mother wins custody, father ordered to seek evaluation." Michael Chen guided Jennifer and Sarah through the hallway toward the exit. Behind them, Marcus and Patricia Rothstein were being ambushed with questions about appeal possibilities. Marcus's face was dark with anger and humiliation. He'd lost, not completely, not in a way that would prevent him from ever seeing his daughter again, but lost enough that his life was fundamentally altered. Outside the courthouse, in the parking lot, Jennifer finally allowed herself to breathe. Sarah was crying again, but this time it seemed like release rather than fear. Jennifer held her daughter and whispered, "It's over, baby. It's over." But even as she said it, Jennifer knew it wasn't over. Not really. There would be supervised visitations. There would be ongoing psychological evaluations. There would be appeals from Marcus's legal team. The case would likely drag on for months, maybe years. That evening, Jennifer sat with Sarah on their apartment's small couch, watching her daughter finally fall into deep, peaceful sleep. For the first time in months, Sarah's body wasn't rigid with tension. Her breathing was even. Her face was relaxed. Jennifer's phone buzzed with texts and calls. News outlets wanted interviews. Online communities debated the ruling. Some people cheered for Jennifer as a protective mother. Others attacked her as vindictive. The story had taken on a life of its own, becoming something larger than the actual family at its center. But Jennifer barely noticed. She was simply grateful that her daughter was safe, that Sarah would be protected, at least for now, that the legal system, for all its flaws and complications, had ultimately prioritized her child's well-being. Judge Hanson's words echoed in her mind. Children's voices matter, and we must create spaces where those voices can be heard. Sarah had been heard. Despite her age, despite her confusion and fear, despite the legal system's preference for clear, articulate testimony, Sarah's voice had mattered. And that, Jennifer thought as she watched her sleeping daughter, might be the most important verdict of all. 6 months after the verdict, Sarah Mitchell was unrecognizable from the terrified 3-year-old who had testified in family court. It was a Saturday morning in late spring, and Sarah was playing in the small community park near Jennifer's apartment. Her light-up sneakers flashed as she ran across the grass, chasing a butterfly that had no intention of being caught. Her laughter carried across the playground, genuine, uninhibited, the pure sound of a child who had reclaimed her childhood. Jennifer sat on a nearby bench, watching her daughter with an expression of profound gratitude. The nightmares had stopped 3 months ago. The regression in behavior had reversed itself. Sarah's preschool teachers reported that she was thriving academically and socially. She'd made new friends. She'd rejoined the world of being a normal 3-year-old, unburdened by the weight of the adult world's legal systems and family conflicts. Sarah remembered almost nothing about the courtroom. When Jennifer occasionally asked gentle questions about it, Sarah's recollection was fuzzy and fragmented. There was a big room, she might say, and a doggy. The experience had been so traumatic that her young brain had largely compartmentalized it, filing it away in a place she didn't need to access. But she remembered Bailey. The handler, a woman named Lisa Chen, had maintained contact with Jennifer and Sarah. Once a month, they would meet at a local park, and Bailey would play with Sarah in a casual, non-official context. These sessions were therapeutic in ways that had nothing to do with courtrooms. Sarah would run with the golden Labrador, throw balls for her to retrieve, pet her soft fur, and simply exist in a space of complete safety and joy. "Bailey loves you," Lisa would tell Sarah, and the child would beam with the knowledge that she had a four-legged friend in the world who thought she was wonderful. Jennifer suspected that these monthly visits with Bailey had more to do with Sarah's recovery than the official psychological counseling that had continued for several months after the trial. The impact of the case had rippled far beyond Sarah's personal recovery. Judge Hanson had indeed moved forward with her recommendation to expand the use of comfort animals in child testimony. The state's Judicial Administration Committee had approved a pilot program in the family court system. 5 new court dogs had been trained and assigned to courthouse facilities. Lisa Chen, Bailey's handler, had been contracted as a consultant to help train other handlers and develop protocols for comfort animal use in legal proceedings. Bailey had become something of a minor celebrity in legal circles. Lisa received invitations to speak at bar associations, family law conferences, and child advocacy organizations. The handler would bring photographs and videos of Bailey's work, but she never brought Sarah. Sarah's identity was protected, her privacy paramount. Still, the story of the 3-year-old girl who had found her voice through connection with a golden Labrador had spread throughout the legal community. "She gave us permission to listen differently," Judge Hanson had said in one conference presentation. "She showed us that a child doesn't need to articulate specific details to communicate truth. Sometimes, all a child needs is safety and presence, and they can find their voice." These conferences had led to journal articles. Judge Hanson had published a piece in the Journal of Family Law titled "Listening to Children: Emotional Truth in Family Court Proceedings." In it, she cited Sarah's case extensively, though without naming her. The article discussed how behavioral indicators and emotional authenticity could be as important as verbal testimony when evaluating child welfare in custody disputes. The article had been read by hundreds of family law attorneys, judges, and child advocates. It had sparked conversations about reforming court procedures to better serve young children. Several states had begun implementing similar comfort animal programs. All of this had started with one small girl saying 4 sentences. "I tell Bailey, I tell Mommy, I don't want to be scared." Marcus Mitchell's path had been more complicated. He had completed the court-ordered psychological evaluation. The psychologist's report indicated that Marcus had significant deficits in understanding age-appropriate boundaries with children. Whether this indicated intentional abuse or simply poor parenting judgment remained a matter of interpretation. Marcus had contested the findings, arguing that the evaluation was biased and that he was being punished for his ex-wife's vendetta. He had taken the parenting classes, though he'd done so resentfully. The classes had focused on child development, appropriate physical contact, and emotional attunement to children's needs. Whether the content had actually changed Marcus's understanding was unclear. His first supervised visitation with Sarah had occurred 3 months after the verdict. Jennifer had provided transportation, and a court-approved supervisor had been present throughout the visit. Sarah, who had no clear memories of her father beyond confusion and fear, had been wary at first, but Marcus had been cautious and gentle, understanding that this visit was being monitored and that any misstep could result in the loss of even supervised contact. The visits had continued monthly, and gradually, Sarah's wariness had eased into a neutral acceptance. She did not adore her father, but she was no longer afraid of him. Whether reconciliation was possible remained to be seen. Judge Hanson's ruling had protected Sarah's safety while leaving the door open for a relationship to potentially develop, but on Sarah's terms and in controlled circumstances. Marcus had appealed the custody arrangement twice. Both appeals had been denied. Eventually, he'd accepted the ruling and ceased legal challenges. Jennifer Mitchell, perhaps unexpectedly, had become an advocate. She had given interviews to local news outlets and parenting podcasts, always with Sarah's identity protected but her story honored. She had started attending family law conferences, speaking on a panel about her experience navigating the custody investigation process. She had connected with other parents who'd gone through similar situations, offering them guidance and emotional support. "The system is imperfect," she would tell other parents, "but it exists for a reason to protect children. If you're worried about your child's safety, trust that worry, seek help. Don't let fear of seeming vindictive silence you." She had also advocated strongly for the expansion of comfort animal programs, crediting Bailey with being the reason Sarah had been able to testify at all. She'd written a letter to her state representative recommending increased funding for court dog programs, and she'd attended a legislative hearing on the topic. Most importantly, Jennifer had learned to forgive herself. She no longer tormented herself with doubt about whether she'd done the right thing in initiating the investigation. Sarah was thriving. Sarah was safe. Whatever ambiguity might exist about what had or hadn't happened, the outcome was clear. Her daughter's well-being had been protected. 1 year after the court case, Lisa Chen and Bailey were invited to speak at an international child advocacy conference in Denver. The presentation was titled, "The Role of Emotional Support Animals in Facilitating Child Testimony," and Lisa had prepared a detailed discussion of Bailey's work in various cases. At the end of the presentation, Lisa had shown a video, not of the courtroom, but of Bailey playing in a park with a small girl in light-up sneakers. The girl was laughing, throwing a ball, running freely. Bailey was doing what she did best, providing unconditional presence and acceptance. The audience had no idea that the child in the video was Sarah Mitchell, but many of them intuited that this was the girl from the famous case. Several attendees had approached Lisa afterward with tears in their eyes. "She's okay," Lisa had told them. "She's more than okay, she's thriving." By Sarah's 4th birthday, the legal case had receded into the background of their lives. Sarah attended preschool 4 days a week. She had best friends. She loved drawing and singing and playing with her toys. She asked questions about why Daddy didn't live with them, and Jennifer answered honestly but age-appropriately. Sarah had accepted this reality with the resilience of childhood. The monthly visits with Bailey continued. Sarah would sometimes ask about the big room with the judge, her memories fragmentary and confused. "Did the doggy help me?" she would ask, and Jennifer would say yes, and that was enough. What Sarah couldn't understand as a young child, was that she had participated in something revolutionary. She had shown a legal system accustomed to adult language and adult proofs that sometimes the most important evidence is the simple, honest expression of a child's need for safety. Judge Hanson continued to receive letters from family law professionals thanking her for her work on court-facilitated animals. Lisa continued to train new handlers and dogs. The pilot program expanded into a full statewide initiative, then began spreading to other states. And Sarah simply lived her life, unaware that her 4 sentences had changed policy, influenced judicial thinking, and demonstrated that children's voices, expressed through whatever means necessary, including the quiet presence of a gentle dog, could reshape systems built by adults. On an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, Sarah sat in the park with Bailey, throwing a ball and laughing as the golden Labrador brought it back. Jennifer watched her daughter play, marveling at the resilience of childhood and the power of connection. Somewhere in a law school classroom, a professor was teaching future attorneys about the Mitchell case. Somewhere, a judge facing a difficult custody decision was remembering that case and thinking about the importance of listening to children's emotional truth. Somewhere, another handler was training another dog, following protocols that had been developed in part because of Sarah's experience. But here, in this moment, Sarah was simply a happy 4-year-old playing with a dog she loved. And that, ultimately, was what it had all been about. The end.